Lena Wren sat alone on the weathered bench at Willowbend Station, her wedding dress pressed and pale against the dusty boards. The bouquet in her lap had begun to droop, petals curling from heat and time. The train had come and gone. He hadn't been on it. No one had. There were no letters now, no promises, only silence stretching wide across the plains. She'd crossed half the country for a man who stopped writing 2 weeks ago. Everett Langston. His words had been sweet, his intentions sweeter. But standing there in the sun, dress wrinkled, hope fading, Lena realized she'd been left. Again. A breeze kicked up, lifting the edge of her veil and carrying it down the platform like a whisper. She didn't chase it. Then came the sound of hooves, steady, unhurried. A lone rider approached, tall in the saddle, face hidden beneath the brim of a dust-worn hat. He stopped, looked at her, and though neither of them spoke, neither turned away. The rider dismounted without a word. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't question why a woman in a wedding dress sat alone at a train station in the middle of nowhere. He simply tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped onto the platform with the kind of quiet that belonged to men who'd seen more than they said. Lena's fingers clenched in her lap. She hadn't planned on speaking, but something about the man's calm presence loosened her voice. "I think I've been left," she said softly, without looking up. The man didn't flinch. "Looks that way," he replied. His voice was low and dry, the kind of sound that settled into the ribs and stayed there. She looked up then. He wasn't young, nor old, just son-age, the kind of man who belonged to the land more than to the town. His eyes were green, touched with gray, and sharp enough to see more than most. "I'm Lena," she offered, mostly to remind herself. He gave a small nod. "Jack." Just Jack. No explanations, no questions. He glanced at her suitcase. "You got anywhere to go?" "No," she admitted. He didn't offer pity, only nodded again, slowly. "You hungry?" The question startled her. She hadn't thought about food since the morning, when her stomach had been too knotted to eat. Now, with the sun beginning to tip westward and the silence of the platform pressing in, she realized she was ravenous. "I could eat," she said. Jack reached down, picked up her suitcase like it weighed nothing, and motioned toward his horse. "My place ain't much," he said, "but it's warm." Lena hesitated. "Not asking for anything," he added. "Just don't see the point in letting someone wilt out here with the lilies." She followed. The horse was tall, steady-eyed. Jack helped her up, careful not to touch her more than necessary. She sat side saddle, hands gripping the horn, veil fluttering like a ghost behind her. He walked beside the horse, leading them through the dust, his footsteps slow and sure. They didn't speak much. The plains stretched wide around them, wheatgrass brushing against the wind like waves on a golden sea. Lena's mind floated somewhere between shame and numbness. With every hoofbeat, the weight of what had happened, what hadn't, sank deeper into her bones. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had softened to violet. Jack's homestead was modest, a one-story house with a slanted porch and a field of dry lavender lining the edge of the fence. Chickens clucked somewhere out back. A barn leaned slightly, as though it had been caught mid-thought, but the windows glowed warm, and smoke drifted from the chimney in a thin ribbon. He helped her down, still silent. Inside, the cabin was clean and practical. Worn furniture, a small fire in the hearth, and shelves lined with jars labeled in careful handwriting. The table was set for one: a tin cup, a chipped plate, a folded cloth napkin. Jack pulled another chair out for her, then fetched a second cup. "You sit," he said. "I'll warm the stew." Lena obeyed, unsure what else to do. She watched as he ladled thick, dark broth into 2 bowls, set them on the table without ceremony. There was cornbread too, dry and a bit crumbly, but warm and honest. She took a bite, and then another. Halfway through her bowl, she realized she hadn't thanked him. "I appreciate this," she said quietly. Jack just nodded. "Ain't nothing." They ate in silence. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried, sharp and lonely. Lena set her spoon down. "You always pick up strangers from train stations?" Jack leaned back in his chair. "Number, but you didn't look like you should be left sitting." Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hand, still wrapped in gloves. I wasn't supposed to be alone. Jack said nothing. I was promised a home. Letters. Letters make things sound real. Her voice faltered. He never even said he changed his mind. Jack stood, walked to the fire, tossed in another log. Sparks leapt into the air like startled birds. Some folks make promises because they like the sound of them, he said. But there are others, quiet ones, that keep them without saying much at all. She looked at him, startled by the depth in that simple truth. He turned. You can stay here tonight. I'll sleep in the barn if that makes you easier. Lena blinked. You don't have to. He held up a hand. I know. She looked around. The little home, the stew, the lavender just outside the window. The stillness in her began to shift, not because she was safe, but because she wasn't expected to pretend anymore. Thank you, she whispered. Jack didn't smile, but his eyes warmed, just slightly. Get some rest, he said. Morning's always clearer than dusk. Lena awoke to the scent of coffee and cedar smoke. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The morning light streamed through lace curtains, throwing soft patterns across the wood-planked floor. Her dress hung neatly on a chair, and her boots sat side by side near the door. She was wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and sun-warmed cotton. Down the hall, she could hear the scrape of a chair and the low hum of a man moving through a morning he was clearly used to greeting alone. She rose quietly, smoothing her hair with trembling fingers. There was a mirror near the wash basin, small and slightly cracked in the corner. She barely recognized the face looking back, eyes rimmed with sleep, lips pressed in a line that used to curve more easily. But something else lingered there too, a steadiness that hadn't been present yesterday. When she stepped into the kitchen, Jack was seated by the stove, nursing a tin mug between both hands. He looked up, eyes catching hers. Sleep all right? He asked. She nodded, brushing a hand down her skirt. Better than I expected. He gestured toward a second mug on the table. Made coffee. It's strong. She took it, fingers curling around the warm metal. She sipped. It was indeed strong, like bark and heat, but it settled her, rooted her deeper into this strange new day. I wasn't sure if you'd still be here, Jack said after a pause. Lena glanced at him. I wasn't sure either. He gave a small nod. No pressure, just fact. Outside, a rooster crowed, and a distant neigh echoed from the barn. Jack stood, stretched, and reached for his hat. Got chores. Fence broke near the east field. She watched him move, unhurried, competent. The kind of man who didn't waste energy, but never left anything undone. I could help, she said suddenly, surprising herself more than him. Jack paused at the door. You ever mend a fence? No, she admitted, but I could learn. He studied her for a moment, then tipped his head toward the porch. Boots are by the steps. 10 minutes later, Lena was trudging behind him across the field, sun warming her shoulders, the hem of her borrowed skirt catching dry stalks as they moved through the grass. Jack carried tools slung over his shoulder, and she held a coil of wire that dug into her palms. They reached the broken section. A post cracked, wire snapped and curled like a serpent in retreat. Jack knelt, inspecting the damage. She crouched beside him. What happened? Cattle pushed through. Might have smelled water past the ridge. He handed her the wire cutters. Hold it here, tight. She did as told. He worked quickly, pulling the new wire taut, securing it with practiced hands. His fingers brushed hers once. Rough, warm. She didn't flinch. By the time they finished, sweat beaded Lena's forehead, and dirt smudged her skirt. But she felt something new, not just tired, capable. You did good, Jack said, standing. She smiled faintly. You didn't think I would? He gave her a look, dry, amused. Didn't know what to expect, but most folks don't show up in lace and fix fences. They walked back slower, the silence easier now. When they reached the porch, Jack handed her a clean cloth and a canteen of water. You planning to stay long, Hammercharner? He asked, not pushing, just curious. Lena took a sip. I don't know. There's no one waiting for me anywhere else. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. Well, he said, This place don't ask much, just work and honesty. She considered that. That might be more than most places offer. He glanced at her again. That's true. As the afternoon settled, Lena helped gather eggs from the coop, her hands fumbling at first but steadying with each attempt. Jack worked nearby, replacing a rotted plank on the barn. Neither said much, but the quiet between them began to stretch like a blanket. Worn, comfortable. Later they sat on the porch steps, sipping more coffee, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The land turned gold, then amber, then the soft blue of early night. Jack spoke first. You never said who he was. Lena didn't respond right away. The question hung in the air, but didn't weigh too heavy. His name was Everett, she said eventually. He sent letters, promises, said he had a house and a piano and a dog named Henry. Jack raised an eyebrow. No dog. No Everett, she replied. At least not for me. He leaned back on his elbows. Some men chase comfort until it turns inconvenient. She laughed softly. You speak from experience? Maybe, he said. I've seen plenty of fools chase what they couldn't carry. The stars began to appear, one by one. Lena drew her knees to her chest, watching the sky. I don't want to be someone waiting anymore, she said quietly. Jack didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at her, he said, Then don't. Be someone who stays. The words settled between them like a seed, not blooming yet, but planted. The morning passed slow, like honey in cold tea. Lena stood in the small kitchen, drying the tin cup with the corner of her apron. The fire had burned low, leaving behind only a dull warmth and the faint smell of cedar. Jack had gone out early, saying something about checking the north fence before the wind picked up. He hadn't asked if she'd come along this time. She hadn't said no. Now the cabin was quiet in a way that didn't ache, the kind of quiet that offered space instead of emptiness. Her hands moved automatically, wiping, folding, straightening, as if tidying the world might keep her from unraveling in it. But some part of her still sat on that platform bench, watching the tracks for a man who never arrived. She stepped out onto the porch, boots thudding softly against the wood. The sun had risen higher now, brushing gold across the fields. Chickens clucked lazily near the coop, and the wind carried the scent of dust and distance. Lena didn't know how long she stood there, arms folded, eyes drifting toward the ridge. Jack appeared over the rise like part of the land itself, broad, steady, silhouetted by the sky. His hat was tipped low, shirt damp at the collar. He walked as he always did, unhurried but with purpose, like the ground answered to his rhythm. When he reached the porch, he didn't speak at first, just nodded. Fence still standing? She asked, voice quiet. For now, he said, wiping his brow. Cattle will test it again, come dusk. She stepped aside as he moved past her, the scent of sweat and sun trailing faintly behind him. Inside, he filled a tin cup at the water basin and drank deep. Lena watched him, unsure why the simple act of him drinking water made her feel steadier. I was thinking I might walk into town tomorrow, she said. Jack looked up. Something you need? He asked. Not sure yet, she said, fingers fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. Just haven't been anywhere but here. Feels like the walls are starting to memorize me. Jack gave a small nod, understanding in the motion. I'll hitch the wagon if you want company. Lena met his eyes. You don't talk much, but somehow I still feel heard. He shrugged. Words get overused. Most things are better understood in silence. She thought of the letters Everett had written, beautiful, elaborate, overflowing with promises, and how none of them had spoken as loudly as Jack's simple offer of a warm meal and a place to rest. That night the wind picked up. It howled low around the eaves, ruffling the dried lavender hanging near the window. Lena lay awake beneath the quilt, staring at the dark rafters, listening to the rhythm of the house breathing around her. A loose shutter tapped now and then, like a heartbeat unsure of itself. She rose quietly, stepping into her boots and wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. Outside, the air smelled of approaching rain. She walked to the edge of the field, to the broken fence they'd mended together. The wire held firm. Her hand ran along the post, fingers catching on a rough edge. The prairie spread wide and black around her, a dark ocean under stars. And then she heard it. Hoof beats, slow, deliberate. Lena turned. Jack approached on foot, reins in hand. Didn't see you in the house. Didn't feel like sleeping, she said. Too many thoughts. He looked past her toward the horizon. They get louder at night. Yours too? He gave a faint smile. Mine never shut up. I just got good at ignoring them. They stood there, neither looking at the other. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick, full of things neither had yet said. Lena shifted. When you found me, back at the station, why did you stop? Jack took his time answering. You look like someone who needed to be seen, he said finally. And I know what it feels like to be passed by. The wind pulled at her shawl, and she let it. For a long moment they stood like that, still figures against the endless dark, bound not by conversation, but by quiet understanding. Do you ever think about the things you didn't choose? She asked, almost to herself. Jack looked down at the earth beneath his boots. Every day, she exhaled slowly. Me too. He turned toward her then, eyes catching the starlight. But you're here now, and that counts for something. A coyote howled far off. Lena didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at Jack, not through him, not past him, but at him. I'd like to help more, she said. If I'm staying, I want to be useful. You already are, he replied. He turned, started back toward the house, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. Come morning, we'll check the creek together. Water's running low. She nodded. I'll be ready. He tipped his hat, then disappeared into the dark. Lena stayed a moment longer. The fence, the field, the stars, they all felt different now. Less like reminders of where she'd been, more like markers of where she might be going. The wind eased, the land exhaled, and Lena Wren turned toward the light still glowing in the cabin window. Soft, steady, waiting. The creek sat low beneath the cottonwoods, water barely a ribbon between the rocks. Morning sun flickered through the leaves, dappling the earth in golden green. Lena crouched by the edge, sleeves rolled, her fingers dipped into the cool shallows. Jack stood a few feet away, boot planted on a smooth stone, eyes narrowed against the glare. Drier than last season, he muttered. Might have to dig a channel off the South Fork. Lena scooped a handful of water, let it slip through her fingers like a thought she couldn't hold on to. I used to dream of a piano, she said suddenly, one with ivory keys and a velvet bench. In the letters, he said it waited by the window. I used to imagine myself playing while he listened. Jack didn't move. And now? She shrugged. Now I think I'd rather learn to mend saddles or build fences. Something that stays done when you finish it. The corner of Jack's mouth lifted, just slightly. Approval, maybe, or understanding. He bent beside her, scooped some water into a tin cup, and handed it over. It ain't tea, but it's cold. She drank. It tasted of mineral and earth, of distance. When they returned to the ranch, the day had already begun to warm. Chickens clucked lazily near the barn, and the dog, a mutt she hadn't noticed before, lay stretched in a patch of sun, tail thumping as they passed. Lena followed Jack to the shed, where tools hung neat and sharp along the walls. He reached for a spade but paused. You ever plant anything? He asked. She shook her head. Not really. I've pressed flowers in books. That count? Close enough. They worked beside the house, turning over a patch of stubborn soil. The dirt clung in clumps, dark and rich. Jack taught her how to angle the spade, how to break the clods without straining her back. They didn't speak much, but the silence wasn't the same kind she'd known before, the kind that isolates. This one moved with them like a third set of hands. When her arms tired, Jack offered her a break without saying so, just handed her the canteen and took her spot. She watched him work, how the muscles in his forearms flexed with each motion, how the sun caught in the strands of his hair, how grounded he seemed, like he belonged to the earth and it to him. I used to be scared of being alone, she said. Jack didn't look up. Ain't hard to see why. I'm still scared sometimes, but here it's different. The quiet doesn't feel like punishment. He straightened, leaned on the spade. Maybe that's 'cause here, it listens back. Later, when the soil was ready, they planted rows of herbs, lavender, sage, thyme, all from Jack's worn paper packets stored in a biscuit tin. Lena knelt beside him, pressing seeds into furrows with careful fingers. Feels strange, she murmured. To plant something I might still be around to see grow. Jack didn't respond right away, just brushed dirt from his palms and said, "That's the whole point, I think." As the sun dipped westward, they sat on the porch, boots dusty, hands stained with soil. A breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of turned earth and distant pine. Lena sipped coffee from a chipped mug. "Did you ever lose someone?" she asked. Jack was quiet. Then, "My wife. Long time ago. Fever took her." Lena's fingers tightened on the mug. "I'm sorry." "She loved the garden," he said, gaze far away. "Used to hum when she watered the mint. Never could keep the dog from trampling the sage, though." A soft smile played on his lips. The memory wasn't jagged. It was worn smooth, like a stone carried in a pocket too long to hurt. "Do you still miss her?" Lena asked. "Every now and then," he replied. "But the missing changes, becomes quieter. Less like a wound, more like a scar." Lena looked down at her hands. "I'm starting to forget the sound of Everett's voice." Jack glanced at her. "That's not a bad thing." "No," she said softly. "I suppose it's not." The light turned honey-colored. Across the yard, the lavender they'd planted caught the sun, its gray-green leaves already reaching skyward. Jack stood, stretched, and walked down the steps. Lena followed. Together they crossed to the new garden. Jack crouched, ran his fingers through the soil, checking the dampness. Lena knelt beside him. "This'll grow," he said. "I want to help it," she replied. He looked at her then. Really looked. "You already are." They stayed there a while, surrounded by dirt and sky, and silence that felt, for the first time in a long time, like home. The days began to stack like warm, flat stones, each one familiar, weightless in its repetition. Lena rose with the sun now, not because she had to, but because the light across the lavender made her chest ache in a way that was no longer grief. She watered the herbs they'd planted, her fingers tracing the soft green shoots like blessings. Jack had built a small wooden trellis for the beans. She hadn't asked. He'd just done it, leaving the hammer marks clean and purposeful. One morning a letter arrived. The postman didn't come all the way to the porch, just left it tucked into the notch of the gate, as if unsure whether it ought to be delivered at all. Lena stared at the envelope for a long while before touching it. Her name was written in the same hand that once made her believe in dreams too fragile to live. Everett. She didn't open it. Not then. Instead, she tucked it into her apron pocket and went back to gathering eggs. The chickens clucked and fluttered, unaffected by the stirrings in her chest. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Jack was chopping wood by the barn, his movements methodical, as always. He looked up as she passed, his eyes catching hers like a quiet question. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. That evening, they sat by the fire, stew between them. Jack passed her the cornbread without asking if she wanted any. She took it, tore it gently with her fingers, her appetite dulled but not gone. After the dishes were cleared, she pulled the letter from her pocket. Jack didn't comment, just sipped his coffee. Lena unfolded the envelope slowly. The paper inside was creased, the ink pressed harder than it needed to be, like he'd tried too hard to sound sincere. "Lena, I've thought about you more than I should admit. I made a mistake not meeting that train. Lucinda was a distraction, not a decision. I was foolish. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I wanted you to know I haven't stopped thinking about the way things could have been. If you're willing, I'd still like to build a life with you. There's a place in Helena, near the river. I have steady work now. I think we could be happy. Yours, Everett." She read it twice, then folded it neatly and laid it on the table. Jack didn't ask, but his hands stilled around his cup. Lena sat back, looking at the low flames. "I used to read his letters like scripture," she said. "Memorized every word. Believed each line like it was carved from truth." Jack's voice was low. "And now? Now it sounds like someone trying to remember what love's supposed to feel like, not someone who knows." Silence settled between them. Then Jack stood, walked to the hearth, and tossed another log into the fire. The flames rose, catching light on his jaw. the lines etched there not from age, but from endurance. "You gonna write back?" he asked, not looking at her. Lena considered it. "I don't think so," she said. "Some stories don't need a second chapter." Outside, the wind picked up again, same as the night he'd found her. But this time, Lena wasn't standing on a platform waiting to be chosen. This time, she was already home. She looked at Jack, saw how he waited without pressing, how his presence offered space, not pressure. "I'm not the same woman I was," she said softly. "Back on that bench, in that dress." Jack nodded. "I know. I don't want to go back to anything that made me feel small." "You don't have to," he said. Their eyes met then, and something passed between them. Not a spark, not a fire, but the slow, sure warmth of coals that had been burning long before either of them noticed. Later, in the quiet before sleep, Lena stood at the edge of the porch, the unopened envelope still resting on the table behind her. She watched the stars blink into place, one by one, like a sky remembering itself. She didn't cry. She didn't tear the letter up either. She just let it be. Jack's voice came from behind her, soft but sure. "You sleeping inside tonight?" She turned. "Unless you'd rather I took the barn." He smirked. "Reckon the hens might protest." She stepped back inside, the scent of smoke and rosemary curling around her like a lullaby. She didn't need promises anymore. She had presence. She had peace. And that was more than enough. The first bloom opened 3 days after the letter. A single lavender spike, soft and pale against the dark soil. Lena found it early, just as the sun crested over the ridge, painting the earth in warm brushstrokes. She knelt beside it, fingers grazing the delicate petals. It felt like a sign, not from Everett, not from the past, but from the land itself. A quiet nod that what had been planted in grief could rise in grace. That afternoon she rode into town with Jack. He'd oiled the wagon wheels the day before, checked the harnesses, packed a cloth sack of eggs and dried mint for the general store. Lena wore her green cotton dress and the boots Jack had cleaned without saying a word. She didn't ask how he'd known they were hers. He just did. The town wasn't big enough for secrets, but it was big enough for second chances. People greeted her differently now, not as the jilted bride from the station, but as the woman who lived out past the wheat bin with the quiet man and the tidy rows of herbs. Children waved. The blacksmith's wife offered her a slice of peach pie wrapped in wax paper. The seamstress smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. Lena smiled back, nothing practiced, nothing polite, just real. At the mercantile, she lingered by the seed display. Jack returned with flour and a box of nails. He paused beside her. "You thinking of adding to the garden?" "Maybe," she said, fingers brushing over a packet of marigold seeds. "It could use more color." Jack nodded. "Then it should have it." That night, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch with mugs of warm milk and honey. The moon hung full over the field, silver light catching on the tips of the new green. Lena set her mug down. "I think I want to stay," she said. Jack didn't move, didn't even blink. "You already are," he said simply. She exhaled, like she'd been holding the decision in her lungs for weeks. "I mean, really stay. Help run the place. Build something with roots. I want my hands in the soil and my name on the gate." Jack looked at her for a long time, his gaze steady and clear. "Then we'll build it together," he said. It wasn't a proposal. It didn't need to be. There would be no white dress this time, no bouquet, no waiting at train stations for men who didn't keep their word. There would be mornings of mud-caked boots and sunburnt shoulders, evenings spent in shared silence, listening to the fence creak and the wind murmur over the ridge. There would be harvests and heartbreak, maybe, but also laughter and long walks to check the creek and planting seeds without knowing if they'd take, and doing it anyway. Lena didn't need certainty. She needed space to become. She found that space in a man who didn't ask her to change, only to stay. One evening, weeks later, she stood at the edge of their garden, a carved cedar sign in her hands. Jack had made it, his initials faintly burned into the bottom corner. She drove it into the earth with the heel of her boot. "Wren's Patch," it read, simple, honest, like everything else here. Jack joined her, dust on his sleeves, a twig in his hair. He looked at the sign, then at her. "You name it after yourself?" he asked, half grinning. "Not myself," she said. "Just who I've finally become." They stood there a while, watching the wind bend the lavender and stir the sage. The earth smelled rich, alive. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. And in the hush that followed, Lena Wren understood something final and quiet and whole. You don't have to be found to belong. You just have to choose where to bloom. Lena Wren set out chasing a man's promises, but she found peace in the quiet presence of someone who made no promises at all. Because sometimes the loudest kind of love is the kind that's never spoken, just lived. Do you think Lena made the right choice by staying? Is true love about patience, choosing each other, or simply learning to grow roots side by side? Tell us in the comments, which moment from this story moved you the most? Every comment plants the seed for another story we'll grow together.